This weekend, I'll be the color analyst for the Morgan State-Delaware State game. You can find this matchup on ESPN3 and the Watch ESPN app, 1 p.m. Eastern Time in Baltimore, Maryland. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Week 6 in the FCS was just as fantastic as weeks 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're not surprised that week 7 has a slew of big games on the schedule that we can't wait to dive into in our FCS Kickoff.
Welcome to the FCS Kickoff Show. I'm David Hassagen, and this is the 4-Minute Offense. As we come to the midway point of the 2019 season, the Southland Conference has once again proved itself to be the Wild West. 6 teams currently are over 500, but none of those teams have 5 or more wins so far this year. Ranked sides Central Arkansas and Southeastern Louisiana both fell in Week 6, and somewhat amazingly, it's the unranked Sam Houston State who find themselves leading the title race. The Bearcats, who had many experts left for dead after losing to independent North Dakota, have rebounded beautifully with 3 consecutive wins over Incarnate Word, McNeese, and Stephen F. Austin. Also undefeated at 2-0 and lurking in the shadows nationally are Nicholls State, who defeated Central Arkansas last week. The Colonels have quietly gone about their business this season with wins against Stephen F. Austin and Prairie View A&M, also to their credit. But if we've learned anything about Southland, you can go from favorite to out of the playoff picture or vice versa in just a matter of weeks. Nicholls hosts Northwestern State, while Sam Houston hosts Lamar in Week 7. In the Big Sky, 2 preseason favorites are watching their postseason hopes shockingly fade into the sunset. In the Big Sky preseason poll, Eastern Washington and UC Davis were 1-2 in the voting, and both were ranked nationally, number 4 and number 5 respectively, in the FCS stats poll. Since that point, little has gone right for the Eagles or the Aggies. For UC Davis, the drop is somewhat more expected after the loss of critical wide receiver Keelan Doss. But still, 3 straight losses to North Dakota State, Montana, and North Dakota have raised the level of concern, with games against Weber State and Montana State still to come. The most surprising drop, though, has been from Eastern Washington, who returned to the FCS playoffs last season. While a loss at Washington might not be surprising, losses to Idaho and Sacramento State certainly are. And while the offense has been one of the country's best, the Eagle defense has been one of the worst, allowing 38.3 points per game and 435.5 yards per contest. Both sides will be looking for comebacks this week. Eastern Washington will host Northern Colorado, while the Aggies will host in-state rival Cal Poly. It has been 15 years since an independent team has qualified for the FCS playoffs, with Florida Atlantic achieving the feat in 2003. But the Fighting Hawks of North Dakota are making a very strong argument that they should be included in this year's playoff field. While a 3-2 record may not jump off the page, when you realize that 2 of those 3 wins have come against teams ranked in the top 25 that week, suddenly 3-2 doesn't sound so bad. With wins over Sam Houston State and UC Davis, head coach Kyle Schweigert has put together a solid squad with a defense that is in the top 30 in passing yards and yards per game allowed. The UND schedule still has some big games remaining, including Montana State and Weber, but the next test will come this week as they travel to Idaho State to take on the Bengals. The popular idiom states that nothing is certain but death and taxes, although that may need to be amended to include North Dakota State being good at football. The number 1 Bison have again been steamrolling opponents like they were a high school freshman team, starting 5-0, including 3 straight wins over ranked opponents. And while the offense has gotten much of the accolades during the Green and Yellow dynasty, it's been this year's Bison defense that should receive the plaudits for their 2019 success. Led by Jabril Cox, Derek Tuska, and Michael Tutsi, North Dakota State ranks in the top 20 nationally in every major defensive category, and in the top 5 in point and yards per game allowed. The Bison will face their 4th consecutive ranked team this week as the Northern Iowa Panthers travel to the Fargo Dome. Now here's another reason why you should choose FCS.
I think the FCS gives a student athlete a chance to really develop in the classroom and on the field. And I don't think there's anything that gets in the way of the development of the student athlete. You know, whereas in sometimes other conferences, other levels of play, I think there's some things that could sway a student athlete in a wrong direction here or there. But I think at the FCS level, I think it's all about the student athlete. I think it's all about his development in the classroom and also on the playing field. And it really it keeps your values and your goals right in front of you. And I think there's less things that are going to take you away from those things.
I'm Ike Abuchalam, and this is your football game plan Big Sky Conference whip around for Week 7. This week, Montana is one of the top nationally ranked teams in the Big Sky according to stats. They enter Week 7 ranked number 8 in the FCS. Their third win in a row saw them win 59-20 on the road versus Idaho State. A 24-point second quarter saw the Grizz overcome their 10-point deficit, and they never relinquished the lead, with strong performances from Dalton Sneed, 464 total yards and 4 touchdowns, Samori Toure and Samuel Alchem, each having over 130 receiving yards and a score. At 5-1, the Grizz are tied atop the Big Sky so far with Montana State and welcome Sacramento State next week. Montana State comes in ranked 6th in the FCS after a victory over Cal Poly in overtime. Though they nearly succumbed to a 21-point comeback, the victory takes the Bobcats to 2-0 in the conference, tied at the top with Montana, and the best overall record as well. Sacramento State is the next opponent for the Bobcats, and this will be their toughest opponent to date, as the Hornets are just sitting outside the top 25. Two teams enter Week 7 at 1-0 in the conference, tied for second with a 3-2 record, Sacramento State and Weber State. The Hornets are enjoying a strong first half of the season and sit tied for second in the Big Sky. Last week, they defeated Big Sky opponent Eastern Washington, who was ranked 21 at the time. Next week, they faced a tough Montana State team. Weber State got 252 yards and 4 touchdowns out of their running backs, which paved the way for a 41-35 victory over Idaho. The 4th-ranked Wildcats play Northern Arizona next week. Northern Arizona, Portland State, Cal Poly, Idaho State, Eastern Washington, and Northern Colorado are all at 1-1 in the Big Sky this week. The Lumberjacks and the Vikings are both at 3-3. The Portland State offense continued to roll versus Southern Utah last week with an evenly balanced offensive attack. Northern Arizona triumphed once again with another strong performance from Case Cookus, who had 406 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. The Vikings took on the Vandals from Idaho, and the Lumberjacks take on Weber State. Cal Poly and Idaho State both sit at 2-3 overall. The Mustangs travel to Davis to take on the Aggies next week. The Bengals take on the North Dakota Fighting Hawks. Eastern Washington dropped out of the top 25 this week, now with a 2-4 record after falling to Sacramento State last week. The Vandals fell to a tough Weber State team last week, bringing their record to 2-4 and 1-2 in the conference. A trip to Portland State to play the Vikings is next. And sitting at the bottom of the Big Sky at an 0-2 conference record are UC Davis and Southern Utah. The Aggies narrowly lost to a tough North Dakota team 38-36 last week. Up next, they take on Cal Poly at home. Southern Utah may have the same record as Northern Colorado, 1-5, but the lack of a conference win has the Thunderbirds in last place in the Big Sky. I'm Ike Abuchalam, and this has been your football game plan Big Sky Conference whip around.
Week 6 in the Big South is come and gone. Before we get into this week's action, let's take a look back at the weekend that was. In the most exciting game of the day, Hampton scored 17 straight points in the fourth quarter of their 40-34 win over North Alabama for their first conference victory. 36 of the game's 74 points were scored in the final quarter. Christian Lopez threw 2 touchdown passes early in the quarter to give the Lions a 27-23 lead, but a failed 2-point conversion led to 2 points the other way for Hampton. Later, DeAndre Francois threw 2 touchdown passes to put the Pirates up for good. Francois finished the day 28 for 41 for 347 yards and 3 scores. He added 31 yards and a score on the ground. Lopez completed 14 of his 27 passes for 288 yards and 4 scores to 4 different receivers. The Pirates outgained the Lions 464 to 392 in the shootout. The Campbell Fighting Camels won their 4th straight and handed Presbyterian their 2nd straight conference loss on Saturday, 28-14. The Blue Hose trailed by a touchdown late in the 4th quarter until Haj Malik Williams found Devarius Bargnair for a 37-yard strike to put the game away. Williams finished with 141 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. On the ground, Cameron David had 137 yards on 22 carries for Campbell, while Jarius Jeter had 132 yards on 23 carries and a 1-yard score for the Blue Hose. The Fighting Camels finished with 96 more total yards in the win. Kurt Everett's 33-yard field goal as time expired gave Gardner-Webb a 24-21 win at Western Carolina. Jalen Cagle had touchdown runs of 2 and 46 yards for the Runnin' Bulldogs. He finished the day with 138 yards on 20 carries. Quarterback Kellen Withlow connected on a 52-yard touchdown pass with Chuma Awana and finished with 194 yards in the win. Kenji Bahar found Lonnie Moore IV for a 1-yard score with 23 seconds left in the game to give Monmouth a slim 16-14 win over Wagner. Moore reeled in 7 passes for 77 yards, while Zach Treadway caught 7 passes for 74 yards. Bahar finished with 25 completions and 216 yards, while Pete Guerrero had 94 yards on the ground and a score in the win. Charleston Southern trailed 19-7 late into the 3rd quarter against Division II Savannah State before finishing the game on a 17-0 run. Jack Chambers found Cameron Brown for a 4-yard score at the end of the 3rd to pull the Buccaneers within 5, and then early in the 4th, Chambers found the end zone on a 1-yard run to give the Buccaneers their first lead of the game. Chambers also had a 13-yard touchdown pass to Jaquan Williams in the win. Now let's take a look at the updated Big South standings. Campbell and Hampton are both at the top at 1-0, with North Alabama right behind them at 1-1. Presbyterian is still looking for their first Big South win, while Kennesaw State, Monmouth, Gardner-Webb, and Charleston Southern all get their first taste of in-conference action in Week 7. Coming off a bye week, the Kennesaw State Owls remain at number 7 in this week's Stats FCS Top 25. The Owls have the nation's number 1 rushing offense, averaging about 370 yards on the ground per game. That's bad news for a Buccaneers defense that allows over 300 rushing yards per week. DeAndre Francois and the Pirates head to Gardner-Webb to take on the Running Bulldogs. Both teams are coming off big 4th quarter wins. The Pirates are led by a balanced offense that has scored 38 points per game, which is top 15 in the nation. Monmouth hosts 0-5 Presbyterian after defeating Wagner last weekend. The Blue Hose manage just over 14 points per game and allow over 425 yards a contest. The Hawks bring in a balanced offensive attack and a defense that allows under 100 rushing yards per week. That will do it for this week in the Big South. Come back next week for all the results and more. For the FCS Conference Whip Around, I'm Frank LaSala.
The surprising Sacramento State Hornets take their 3-2 record into Bozeman, Montana to battle with the Bobcats of Montana State. Now, the Hornets do bring in a lot of balance to this ball game and is a big reason why they've had success. Now, where the Bobcats have had their success is along the offensive line. I do like Montana State in this ball game. They've done a great job of protecting their quarterback and facing edge rusher George Obinna and his Hornets pass rush. They'll do a good job of winning in the trenches, which will ultimately win them the game. Over in the Big South, Kennesaw State, who comes off of a bye week, welcomes in Charleston Southern. Now the Owls begin Big South play in a game against the Bucks and are looking to take full advantage of a defense that has had trouble in getting off the field. Now the Owls' triple option attack shouldn't have any issues in keeping that statement true, at least for one more week. I like Kennesaw State.
4 of the 5 games in the CAA this past week came down to one score. Rhode Island took a late lead on a Vito Prairie touchdown pass to Aaron Parker with just over 5 minutes left in the game. Prairie threw for a career-high 389 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 31-28 win. Albany's attempted comeback fell short against Richmond. Jeff Undercuffler connected with Gerard Reeves for a touchdown to pull the Great Danes within 3 with 2 minutes and 47 seconds left in the game. Albany had a chance, forcing the Spiders to punt. However, the Great Danes jumped off sides, giving Richmond a first down and a 23-20 win. Elon quarterback Davis Cheek struggled in the team's 26-10 loss to New Hampshire. He could only throw for 184 yards and added 4 interceptions. 2 went the other way for pick sixes. Villanova survived an upset bid from William & Mary in a back-and-forth game. With 2 minutes left in the game, Nova faced a 4th and goal, a play that would be the deciding factor. Quarterback Daniel Smith threw a 1-yard pass to D. Will Barley for the touchdown, giving the Wildcats a 35-28 win. Finally, James Madison held off an upset bid themselves when it took overtime to beat Stony Brook 45-38. Seawolves quarterback Tyquell Fields threw for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyson Lawton added 3 scores on the ground. The Dukes had 329 yards on the ground and 5 rushing touchdowns. Juwan Hamilton had 2 of those touchdowns, one of which was the winner in overtime. New Hampshire linebacker Ole Manzik was awarded Stats Freshman Player of the Week. He was a key part in the UNH's conference win over Elon, tallying 8 tackles and 3 sacks, both career highs. He also returned his first career interception, 55 yards for a touchdown, giving the Wildcats a 13-3 lead in the first quarter. Now let's take a look into the standings. 5th-ranked Villanova is at the top of the conference with 3 wins and no losses. 2nd-ranked James Madison and New Hampshire are both 2-0. 15th-ranked Delaware is 1-0. Richmond, 22nd-ranked Stony Brook, 9th-ranked Towson, and Albany are all 1-1. Elon is 1-2. 18th-ranked Maine and William & Mary are both winless in conference play at 0-2, and Rhode Island sits in last at 0-3. A quick look into next week's games. It could be a defensive battle when Richmond and their 36th ranked defense faces off against Maine and their 35th ranked defense. Maine also has the 44th ranked offense, while Richmond has a middle of the pack offense. And what could be the most electrifying game in the CAA? Stats Game of the Week. 2nd ranked James Madison takes on 5th ranked Villanova, who has been dominant this season. In a matchup that will decide who is in the lead in the CAA, both teams will look to showcase their amazing offenses. JMU has the 3rd best offense in the nation, 5th in rushing and points per game. Nova has the 14th best offense, 9th in rushing, and 10th in points per game. 15th ranked Delaware goes on the road to take on conference rival Elon. What Delaware does best is control the scoreboard, ranked 55th offensively and 58th defensively. Elon struggles in that category, ranked 97th offensively and 84th defensively. Tom Flacco's 9th-ranked Tigers and their 45th-ranked passing offense will go head-to-head with Albany and their 23rd-ranked passing offense in what should be a shootout. Rhode Island has a highly respected passing game, which is ranked 11th in the FCS. Unfortunately, they have a tough matchup against FBS's Virginia Tech, which has a tough defense that does its best work against the pass. Finally, 22nd ranked Stony Brook hosts New Hampshire. The Seawolves have the 8th best offense in the nation. They face a tough opponent in the Wildcats and their 24th ranked defense. For the FCS Whip Around, I'm Dylan Cieslik.
What's going on out there? I'm Zachary Morgan, and here's your Ivy League Whip Around. Harvard flat out crushed Howard 62-17 on Saturday, with 2 of their players, Devin Darrington and DeMarcus Stratford, both rushing for over 100 yards. Special teams were also a huge part of the Crimson victory as they blocked 3 punts during the game, including one that was recovered in the end zone for a touchdown. Yale trounced the Fordham Rams 48-24 this past Saturday, getting most of their dirty work done in the first half with 45 of the Eli's points scored prior to halftime. The deficit ended up being too much for Fordham to overcome, even with the team holding Yale to only 3 points in the second half. With the win, Yale remains unbeaten on the year. The Cornell Big Red fell to the Georgetown Hoyas on Saturday in a defensive struggle 14-8. Cornell did put up a valiant effort, though, tying the game on the last play of the third quarter with a Harold Coles rushing touchdown and then a successful 2-point conversion to tie the game at 8. But it wouldn't be enough, as the Hoyas would answer with a touchdown of their own to retake the lead and would hold on from there. The Brown Bears lost a close one to the Rhode Island Rams 31-28 in this year's Governor Cup showdown. Quarterback E.J. Perry IV had over 500 total yards from scrimmage, but ultimately it wasn't enough to reclaim the cup from Rhode Island, who has now won the matchup 2 years in a row. On Friday night, we got our first taste of Ivy League action for the weekend with the Dartmouth Big Green going on the road to take on the Penn Quakers at Franklin Field. After a touchdown scored by Jared Gerbino to cap off a long drive late in the fourth quarter gave the Big Green a 21-point lead, the Quakers would attempt a miraculous comeback, but were ultimately unsuccessful, with Dartmouth taking the game 28-15. The other Ivy League game this past weekend featured the 25th-ranked Princeton Tigers playing host to the Columbia Lions on Saturday. Columbia managed to carry a 10-7 lead into halftime, but would ultimately be unable to hang on as Princeton went on to score 14 unanswered points to win the game 21-10. This week's Ivy League matchups will feature Cornell traveling to take on Harvard and the Dartmouth Big Green hosting the Yale Bulldogs on Saturday. While Harvard shouldn't have too much trouble with Cornell, Dartmouth and Yale looks to be a very competitive game between two of the teams that are both looking to contend for the Ivy League title. Look for Yale to bring a lot of fire out of the gate as they try to avenge last year's blowout, but don't be fooled. This is a game that could really go either way. And for the rest of the Ivy League, the number 21 ranked Princeton Tigers will host Lafayette on Friday night. Columbia plays host to Central Connecticut State, Penn will take on Sacred Heart at home, and Brown will host Holy Cross. For your Ivy League Whip Around, I'm Zachary Morgan, and I will see you next week.
We have a huge matchup in the Ivy League between Yale and Dartmouth. Now, the Bulldogs have one of the league's top passers in Kurt Rawlings and also one of the top tailbacks in Zane Dudek, running behind one of the best offensive lines in the conference, but it will be up to the Bulldogs defense in this game as the Big Green do a great job of owning the line of scrimmage and running the football. We've seen the growth in the game of quarterback Jared Garbino for Dartmouth this season, and they now have more of an element to the pass in their arsenal as well. I do like Dartmouth in this ball game. I don't think this game gets out of the teens. It'll be a defensive slugfest with the Big Green coming out on top.
Things continue to heat up after Week 6 in the MEAC now that conference games have become the norm. Last week, Bethune-Cookman outlasted Morgan State to win 31-20, where quarterback Acavius Williams was responsible for 4 total touchdowns. The Bulldogs of South Carolina State made another statement win as they took down Delaware State 38-24, while the number 15 Aggies easily handled Norfolk State 58-19. Jermaine Martin was the star again for A&T, rushing for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 10 carries. In other action, Howard was handled by the Crimson of Harvard 62-17, while Florida A&M stayed in the Celebration Bowl conversation as they held on against North Carolina Central 28-21. The Eagles tied the game with 4:25 left in the game with a 16-yard touchdown pass to Tyler Barnes, but the Rattlers quarterback Ryan Stanley came up huge again late, finding Xavier Smith from 2 yards out with 32 seconds left to earn the victory. After 6 weeks, North Carolina A&T, Florida A&M, and Bethune-Cookman sit even at 2-0 in the MEAC and 4-0 overall, ever increasing the chances that the MEAC may earn an at-large bid in the FCS playoffs. They are followed closely by South Carolina State and then NC Central and Howard at 1-1 in conference, with Norfolk State, Morgan State, and Delaware State rounding out the field. As we hit the midway point of the season, Week 7 will feature 4 critical matchups. On Thursday, the MEAC will get some national exposure on ESPNU when Bethune-Cookman travels north to Durham, North Carolina to take on the NC Central Eagles at 6 p.m. On Saturday, Morgan State will get another crack at getting their first win of the season against the Hornets of Delaware State, while 2 1-5 teams face off at William H. Green Stadium as Howard hosts Norfolk State. But this week's key matchup will once again feature the Rattlers of FAMU as they travel to Orangeburg to take on South Carolina State. Head coach Buddy Pugh and his Bulldogs have been one of the unsung stories of 2019, sitting at 3-1 with a Week 1 win over Wofford. Meanwhile, the Rattlers are going to have to avoid the trap game mentality coming in on a 4-game winning streak, but with a home game against North Carolina A&T coming up next week. For the FCS Conference Whip Around, I'm David Hassagen.
Welcome to Week 7 in the Missouri Valley, and what a way to kick off the 35th season of conference play last week as we saw teams make statements, undefeated teams fall, and a triple overtime classic. Taking a look back at last week's games, South Dakota rolled to victory against Indiana State. Northern Iowa handed Penguin Nation its first loss of the season. South Dakota State, behind another strong defensive effort, beat Southern Illinois in the 106th Hobo Day game. North Dakota State showed the league why they're number one as they decimated Illinois State. And in the most exciting conference game so far this season, Missouri State, behind quarterback Philip Huslig's 4 TDs, beat Western Illinois in triple overtime. After the first week of conference play, here are the standings. North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Northern Iowa, Missouri State, and South Dakota are all 1-0, while Penguin Nation, Western Illinois, Illinois State, Southern Illinois, and Indiana State are all 0-1. Now it's time to take a look at this week's games, as Western Illinois, coming off that triple overtime heartbreaker, looks for the first victory of the season as they travel to Terre Haute, Indiana to take on Indiana State. Missouri State looks to make it 2 wins in a row as they welcome South Dakota and its high-flying offense led by dual-threat quarterback Austin Simmons. Number 11, Illinois State, looks to bounce back after a tough loss to North Dakota State as they travel to Carbondale, Illinois to take on the scrappy, never-say-die Salukis. And finally, in co-games of the week, number 3, South Dakota State takes their high-flying offense and their staggering defense to the Igloo as they face Bo Pelini's number 16-ranked Penguin Nation, who look to get back on track as they use their monster running game to wear out the Jacks' tough defense. And the number 1 Bison, coming off their statement victory against the Redbirds, play their 4th straight ranked opponent as they welcome number 7 Northern Iowa to the Fargo Dome. Bisman freshman quarterback Trey Lance just continues to impress as he has 9 rushing and 12 passing touchdowns and no interceptions while leading the league in pass efficiency. But he will be facing a dominant Panthers defense as they held Penguin Nation's 300-yard per game unstoppable running attack to a mere 55 yards while coming up with 6 sacks. Time for this week's Players of the Week. Offensive honors goes to South Dakota quarterback Austin Simmons, who ran for a career-high 138 yards and passed for 210 yards and 4 touchdowns. Defensive honors goes to Northern Iowa defensive end Ellerson Smith, who had 2.5 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. And special teams honors goes to Missouri State punter Brendan Withrow, who broke a Missouri State singles-game punting average record with a 51.6 average on 7 attempts, including a 70-yarder. For the Missouri Valley Conference, I'm Brian Sullivan.
Over in the MEAC, FAMU and South Carolina State meet up in Orangeburg, South Carolina. The Rattlers have won 4 straight games and their offense looks as explosive as it did last season. Defensively, they've gotten timely stops late in ball games, which have been needed to close out those contests. Now, the South Carolina State Bulldogs are one of the more fundamentally sound teams in the conference with one of the best defenses as well. Offensively speaking, their ground game is able to beat teams into submission. Now, their passing game is starting to click as well with quarterback Tyrese Nick leading the way. I like South Carolina State in this ball game. They're one of the true dark horses to make it to the Celebration Bowl. I just love the way they are playing so far this season. South Dakota State heads to Youngstown State this weekend in a pivotal Missouri Valley Conference game. The Jackrabbits' balance and stout defense makes them a very dangerous opponent in the FCS. The Penguins proved last week against Northern Iowa that if their run game isn't having success, they'll struggle to generate enough offense to be successful. Now, while the Penguins' defense will be game in this one, I don't think Youngstown State will be able to move the ball with any level of consistency against the Jackrabbits. Staying in the Missouri Valley Conference with Northern Iowa and North Dakota State, the Panthers get their swing at the number 1 ranked Bison this week and come into this matchup with a pretty formidable defense led by Ellerson Smith. Unfortunately, I don't trust their offense versus this Bison defense. I like North Dakota State to pull away in the second half and get the win.
We're around the midway point of the season, and there are no signs that the action will be slowing down. Central Connecticut State beat Sacred Heart decisively 28-3 to go 1-0 in the MEAC. The Dukes relied on a strong performance by A.J. Hines to beat LIU 21-14, giving Duquesne their first conference win of the year. Bryant got his first win of the season against Merrimack 24-17. Alfred Dorber exploded for 138 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground, while Nisavachia had 94 yards receiving and a TD of his own. And Wagner dropped a heartbreaker to Monmouth 16-14. Now to recognize a couple of great performances. Offensive Player of the Week is Aaron Winchester from Central Connecticut State. Winchester had 337 yards of total offense and a 76 completion percentage. The Defensive Player of the Week is Davon Ellison. Ellison had 3 takeaways in Duquesne's victory over LIU. So let's take a look at the standings. St. Francis sits on top of the division, going 2-0 in conference play. Central Connecticut State, Duquesne, and Wagner are right behind them, as each are 1-0 in the NEC. Central Connecticut State has a 4-1 record overall. After the loss to the Blue Devils, Sacred Heart is 1-1 in in-conference play. Robert Morris has yet to face any NEC teams. While Bryant and LIU are at the bottom of the conference, LIU has not been successful in any of their 3 NEC contests. There's plenty of excitement as we have a couple of teams taking on Ivy League competition. 4-1 Central Connecticut State travels to Columbia to face the 1-2 Lions. Columbia was successful to start the season, beating St. Francis, but then dropped their next 2. Winchester is coming off another great performance. It'll be interesting to see if he can build on his great season in this one. After this game, the Blue Devils have 6 straight against NEC competition. Sacred Heart travels to Penn. The Pioneers are coming off a bad loss to the Blue Devils, in which Marchie was held to only 126 yards while throwing 2 picks. The Quakers have a 1-2 record so far this year, but have offensive threats with quarterback Nick Robinson and running back Carrigan Brooks. It's important for Marchie to bounce back after his last game and protect the football. Even in the loss, Julius Chestnut had a stellar game. Teams have been able to run against the Quakers, so look for Chestnut to test their defense. St. Francis and Robert Morris square off against each other in this division contest. Both teams should be well rested coming off a bye. Elijah Jackson was a bright spot for a Colonials offense that couldn't do much of anything against Youngstown State. They'll need another strong performance from him. They'll also need strong performances from Martin and Gonzalez. On the other side, the Red Flash hopes that Jason Brown can have a strong performance. Bryant hosts LIU in another NEC matchup. These two have just 1 win between them, with Bryant's win over Merrimack. If LIU hopes to get a win, Beathard has to improve on his mistakes. In their loss to Duquesne, he was intercepted twice, despite throwing for 2 touchdowns. Alfred Dorber has emerged for the Bulldogs. Will he be able to repeat that kind of performance against the Sharks? Duquesne, Wagner, and Merrimack are all off, with the Dukes and Seahawks taking on NEC opponents when they come back. That's all the time I have. I'm Scott Glennon with this FCF Whip Around.
This week in the OVC, Eastern Illinois will welcome in number 17 Jacksonville State. Number 20 Southeast Missouri State will head to Austin Peay. Murray State will take on Tennessee State, and Tennessee Tech will host UT Martin.
Don't look now, but the UT Martin Skyhawks are currently leading the Ohio Valley Conference with a 2-0 record, 3-2 overall, and it's been due to an explosive offense that's able to generate big plays on the ground. Now, over the last 2 weeks, the Skyhawks have averaged nearly 40 points a game and have seemed to right the ship since their 28-14 loss to Southern Illinois. In their 3 victories, they've scored 42, 40, and 38 points respectively, and we'll see if that trend keeps up this week against Tennessee Tech. Hey, while we're at it, let's take a look at that game in the OVC between the Golden Eagles and Skyhawks. Running back Peyton Logan is averaging 7.7 yards a carry for UT Martin this season and has scored 5 rushing touchdowns. Defensively, they face a tough task this week as Tennessee Tech does a great job of scoring the ball, especially in the passing game. Now, I like Tech to win this ball game. Quarterback Bailey Fisher is playing really well, and the Golden Eagles defense will do a great job in slowing down Logan and make the Skyhawks beat them throwing the football. Also in the OVC, Southeast Missouri State travels to Austin Peay, and the Redhawks are coming off of an overtime thriller last weekend against Tennessee Tech. The running game behind Zion Custis and Mark Robinson spearheaded their offense as both guys were picking up yards in chunks. I still have some concerns about their passing game against this Austin Peay secondary, plus the balanced nature of the Governor's offense leads me to believe that they will win this ball game having control throughout. I like Austin Peay. In the NEC, Central Connecticut State travels down I-95 to face off with the Columbia Lions of the Ivy League, and two things travel really well: run game and defense, and the Blue Devils have that in abundance. Columbia right now is lacking in explosive plays on both sides of the ball this season, which is a big reason why I think they'll struggle against Central Connecticut State.
What is up, guys? It's Scott Schertzen, and this is your Patriot League whip around for week 6. We had 4 games on tap last week, 2 in conference and 2 out of conference. So we start in conference with Lehigh getting their first win of the year over Colgate and Holy Cross over Bucknell, both by the score of 21-14. The Hoyas improved to 4-1 out of conference in a low-scoring, defensive-heavy effort with a 14-8 win over Cornell, and lastly Fordham was doubled up by Yale on the road, 48-24. So, going into the new week, here are the standings. Right now, because of the conference wins, Holy Cross and Lehigh are tied for first despite the overall 2-3 record for each. Following that are the Hoyas and the Rams, who play their first conference games of the season against each other, and rounding things out are the Leopards, who've yet to play a conference game, and Bucknell and Colgate, who are 0-1 in conference. Defensive and offensive player of the week time. Defense goes to Garrett Van Itali out of Bucknell. The 5'10", 210 linebacker from Teaneck got himself a 52-yard pick six in the Bison game, while the offensive nod goes to Fotis Kokosiolis out of Fordham. The sophomore from Illinois had 8 catches for 136 yards, including a 70-yard TD pass from Tim DeMorat in the first quarter. Now, coming up this week, we've got 4 games on tap. Starting Friday, the Leopards are on the road against the 3-0 Princeton team that's outscored their opponents by a score of 42-13 over the first 3 games. The Leopards had a much-needed week off, which should help rest up that rushing defense, which so far has given up an average of 200 yards per game. Going into Saturday, we have 3 games scheduled, 2 in conference and 1 out of it. We have the 4-1 Hoyas at home against the 2-3 Rams. Georgetown's defense has been stingy all season, giving up an average of 51 yards a game, and so far not allowing a single passing TD. On the other end, Ram quarterback Tim DeMorat, whom I just mentioned, is a name I've mentioned before here, and last week passed for 3 touchdowns, so I'm liking the particular head-to-head matchup here. Also, Colgate is at home against Bucknell, so one of these teams will come out with their first win of the year. This is a lower-end matchup on both ends of the ball for both teams, as we have a Colgate team that's averaged 11.5 points a game going against a Bison team that's averaging just under 14. On the other end of the ball, Colgate's weaker run defense should offset a weaker Bucknell running game, while Bucknell's weaker passing game matches a weaker Colgate passing game. Really curious to see how this one's going to play out on Saturday. Lastly, Holy Cross takes on the 1-2 Brown Bears in Providence, Rhode Island. The Bears have had a weak pass defense against the Crusaders, which they could exploit. Across 3 games this season, the Bears D has averaged 364 yards a game through the air. Also worth noting is the Bears, and that'll be the last time I say that, love to go for it on 4th down. In 3 games, they've gone for it on 4th down 14 times, successfully converting on 8 attempts. As for Lehigh, they've got the week off. As for the Patriot League FCS Whip Around, I'm Scott Schertzen. Stay awesome.
I'm Alex Marinoni with the Week 7 Pioneer League Whip Around. In Week 6, the Pioneer League got into conference play that saw one game come down to a game-winning field goal and the rest mostly one-sided games. To quickly recap, Butler drops a heartbreaker to Stetson on the road 30-27. Stetson kicker Johnny Messina drills a 27-yard field goal as time expires to secure the victory. Butler was able to pick off Stetson quarterback Gavin DeFilippo 4 times in this one, but it still wasn't enough to come out on top. Stetson running backs Jareem Westcott and Jalen Leary combined for 270 yards on the ground and a score. Out in Ohio, the Flyers beat up the Dolphins 56-28. Calvin Turner Jr.'s 169 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns were not enough to keep up with the Dayton's record-breaking day. Flyers quarterback Jack Cook tossed for 6 touchdowns, eclipsing Dayton's single-game record. Also, tight end Adam Troutman, who went for 6 catches and 107 yards, also broke a Dayton single-game record with 4 touchdown receptions. Also for Troutman, in the first quarter, he passed former Flyer Bill Franks' career receptions mark of 133 with reception number 134. In Kentucky, Davidson handles Morehead State on the road 42-31. Davidson running back Wesley Duggar took off for 134 yards and 4 touchdowns to help Davidson jump out to an early 42-10 lead. Morehead State tries to rally, putting up 21 unanswered in the 4th, but it proved to not be enough. In Iowa, Drake beats up Valparaiso 35-6. The Bulldogs' defense came to play as they held the Crusaders' offense to just 131 total yards and 2 of 15 on 3rd downs. The Bulldogs' defense also came away with 2 interceptions. In our final game of Week 6, Marist falls to San Diego 31-7. It was all San Diego in this one as quarterback Reed Sinet tossed for 341 yards and 3 touchdowns, and receiver Alex Bandone hauled in 3 balls for 110 yards and 2 scores. San Diego cornerbacks Cassius Johnson and David Talbert each picked off Mariners quarterback Austin Day 2 times apiece, with one of Tolbert's going for 6. Now let's take a quick look at the standings after Week 6. Drake remains at the top after their victory over the Crusaders with a 2-0 conference record. Below them is Davidson, Dayton, and San Diego, all at 1-0 in conference and 4-1, 3-1, and 2-2 respectively. Behind them is Stetson at 1-1 in conference and 4-1 overall. Then it's Marist at 1-2, but just 1-4 overall. Morehead State, Jacksonville, Butler, and Valparaiso all round out the bottom at 0-1 in conference play. For Week 7, the Pioneer League will continue its all-conference play. We will start in Indianapolis in the Battle of the Bulldogs with Drake visiting Butler. Butler will look to get the taste of last week's tough loss out of their mouth, but will have to go up against the current conference top dog who just held Valparaiso to just 131 total yards. Butler will be a much tougher matchup for Drake's defense and should be a fun game in Indiana. Next, we have Morehead State headed to Jacksonville to take on the Dolphins. Calvin Turner Jr. has been everything for this Dolphins offense and will have to be against Morehead State's offense that has put up 33.8 points a game. The question in this game is, will the Dolphins defense do enough to slow down Mark Pappas and this Eagles offense? It took the Eagles until the 4th quarter last week to really get it going. They're going to look to get the lead early. After that, we have the 4-1 Dayton Flyers heading to Indiana to take on the Valparaiso Crusaders. Dayton is coming off a big win that saw the offense put up a lot of points. Jack Cook has posted 13 touchdowns to lead the conference, and tight end Adam Troutman has averaged over 100 receiving yards a game. On the flip side, Valparaiso has struggled to get anything going this year offensively. They're going to need a much better performance to keep up. In our final game, we have, in my opinion, the Pioneer League's Game of the Week. We have 2 conference favorites in San Diego heading to North Carolina to take on the Davidson Wildcats. San Diego was the near unanimous favorite to win the conference again this year, and they have showed why so far this year that with this explosive offense. Davidson has been one of the top defenses in the FCS this year and have the talent on that side of the ball to stifle San Diego. The winner of this game could very well be the conference winner in the end. Expect a great one here. For the Pioneer League, I'm Alex Marinoni.
It's Statement Saturday in both the Patriot and Pioneer Leagues, and we'll start in the Patriot where Georgetown welcomes in Fordham. The Rams' passing game will have to be on point this weekend as the Hoyas' defense is one of the best at getting to the quarterback and also turning the ball over. If Georgetown's offense can play with the consistency they've shown in spurts this season, they'll be just fine. I think this game, though, will be about the defense and special teams, and in that regard, I like Georgetown to get the win. In the Pioneer League, Davidson is looking to pass another test this season as they welcome in San Diego. The Wildcats need to get off to a great start against the Toreros as their offense, led by wide receiver Michael Bandy, does a great job of striking quick, especially in the passing game. Now, we've seen a much better defense this year for the Wildcats, which has been a pleasant surprise so far this season. Offensively, we know they can push the pace, push the tempo, and push the points upwards on the scoreboard. I do like Davidson in this game. Look for the Wildcats to put themselves firmly in the driver's seat this season for the Patriot or the Pioneer League crown.
Troy Anthony here, bringing you your football game plan whip around for the Southern Conference. We're right at the halfway point for majority of our SoCon teams, and conference play is in full tilt right now. Let's dive right into our only non-conference game of the week. The Gardner-Webb Bulldogs will travel to the Western Carolina Catamounts and defeat them 24-21. This game was tight the whole way, with both teams pretty much going score for score. The Bulldogs just edged out the Catamounts with the last-second field goal to cap off a 16-play, 54-yard drive to get the win. Next up, the Catamounts look to end this 2-game skid when they visit the Citadel next weekend at 2 o'clock. Speaking of snapping streaks, this past Saturday, the VMI Cadets defeated the Citadel Bulldogs 34-21, snapping their 12-game losing streak to the Bulldogs. VMI held the lead the entire game, and a double-digit lead for almost the entire second half. Wide receiver Jacob Harries played a major role for the Cadets, as he would have 8 receptions for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns, one of which was a 61-yard dime from Udinski. VMI looks to roll in their momentum this Saturday as they host the Sanford Bulldogs at 1:30. Sanford will be looking to bounce back in that matchup against VMI after the Furman Paladins just came in and took them in their house, laid it on them 54-14. Furman scored on all but their last 3 offensive drives in the game. Furman quarterback had only 9 passing attempts, but went 6 of 9, 183 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Their running back Devin Wynn had 14 carries for 217 yards and 2 touchdowns. Next week, Furman can sit back and relax as they have a bye. You can catch them again October 19th as they host the Citadel at 1 o'clock. In our next matchup, the Wofford Terriers would defeat the ETSU Buccaneers on the road 34-27. After the Terriers put up 21 points in the second quarter, the Buccaneers had no answer. It didn't help that Wofford would also win the time of possession by 15 minutes. Terriers quarterback Joe Newman would rush 22 times for 185 yards and 4 scores. Wofford would take this win into their bye week and get ready to take on the Catamounts, October 19th at 1:30. The ETSU Bucks also head into their bye week and look to visit the Chattanooga Mocs Thursday, October 17th at 7 o'clock. In the final matchup of the week, we have the Mocs on the road defeating the Mercer Bears 34-17. The Bears had a strong first quarter, putting up 14 points, but they couldn't put together any drives after that. The Mocs were constantly putting together long scoring touchdown drives. Both teams on their byes this week, the Mocs returning to action at home October 17th against the Buccaneers, and the Bears hosting the Keydets on the 19th. Let's take a look at the SoCon standings. At number 1, we have the 4-2 Furman Paladins. With their win, the Paladins also climbed 3 spots to number 11 in the national rankings. At 2, we have the 3-3 Chattanooga Mocs, then the 3-3 Sanford Bulldogs, 3-2 Wofford Terriers, 3-3 VMI Keydets, 2-4 Mercer Bears, 2-4 Citadel Bulldogs, and rounding out the SoCon, we have the 2-4 ETSU Bucks. That'll do it for this Football Game Plan Southern Conference Whip Around. I'm Troy Anthony.
I'm Dan McGillicuddy for Football Game Plan with the Southland Conference Week 7 Whip Around. Conference play is in full swing, so let's get to it. The Lumberjacks of Stephen F. Austin gave the Sam Houston State Bearcats all they could handle, but it wasn't enough as the visiting Bearcats pulled out a 31-20 victory. The 11-point margin isn't indicative of how close this game was. The Jacks led 10-0 and 20-17 before the Bearcats scored 2 TDs in a minute and 13 seconds apart. The Lumberjacks could have pulled off an upset if only they didn't commit 6 turnovers. The Central Arkansas Bears traveled to Nichols to face the Colonels, and the Colonels thumped them 30-14. Nichols led 20-0 at the half, and the Bears never came close. In one of the more entertaining games, the McNeese Cowboys used a late TD to top the visiting Southeastern Louisiana Lions. The Cowboys had this game under control, up 24-3 nearing the close of the first half, but the Lions put up 14 points on the board in the last 2:42 to trail by 7 at the half. The Lions tacked on another 10 points, taking their first lead early in the fourth quarter. The two teams traded TDs as the Lions led by 3 with 7 minutes left. Cody Oregon hit Trevor Begg for a 33-yard TD and the eventual game-winning score with 2:02 remaining. The Bears couldn't drive the field and lost the ball on downs to seal the win for the Cowboys. The Lamar Cardinals gave the hometown fans a treat as they beat the Abilene Christian Wildcats 27-24. Trailing by 7 entering the fourth quarter, the Cards shut down the Wildcats and scored 10 of their own for their first conference win. University of Incarnate Word Cardinals faced a daunting task at Houston Baptist. How do you shut down the high-powered Husky offense? They held the Huskies to 36 points and prevailed 38-36. The Cards led 28-17 at the half and by 8 entering the fourth quarter. The Huskies got a TD with 6 minutes left to cut the deficit to 2, but the 2-point conversion failed and the Cards walked away victorious. A peek at the standings. Sam Houston in first at 3-0, followed by Nichols at 2-0, Southeastern Louisiana and Incarnate Word at 2-1, Houston Baptist Central Arkansas at 1-1, 3 teams at 1-2, and 1 win Abilene and winless Northwestern close out the standings. Now for the players of the week. Incarnate Word quarterback John Copeland gets the nod. 33-44, 344 yards, 3 TDs, no interceptions, and an upset road victory over Houston Baptist. And oh my, defensive player of the week is senior linebacker Royce C. from Sam Houston State Bearcats. He only had 9 tackles, 1 for a loss, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, 2 interceptions against Abilene Christian. Apparently the Jacks offense doesn't want to see Royce anymore. Houston Baptist Gamar Gertie Brito earns a Special Teams Award. He averaged 42.3 yards per kickoff return on 3 returns, including 1 for a TD. Stephen F. Austin is idle this week. Lamar will be at Sam Houston. Nichols hopes to avoid a letdown against visiting Northwestern State. Central Arkansas hosts McNeese. And the game of the week, in my opinion, has Southeastern Louisiana hosting Incarnate Word. That's a wrap on Week 7 for the Southland Conference. I'm Dan McGillicuddy. Enjoy the games, everyone.
We should see a lot of points scored in the next game between Sanford and VMI. The Bulldogs offense has done a great job in putting up points this season. Sans last week, obviously, versus Furman, where they ran into a big purple buzzsaw. VMI's defense isn't as good as Furman's, but their offense is as good as Sanford. The Keydets upset the Citadel last week, once again getting great play from their quarterback Reese Udinsky. I'm going to go with Sanford in this ball game. The Bulldogs are just a little bit more solid on the back end than the Keydets, in my opinion, which should be good for a few stops later in the contest. I like this matchup in the Southland Conference this week between Lamar and Sam Houston State. Quietly, the Cardinals quarterback Jordan Hoy has turned into one of the more dangerous dual threats in the Southland. He's been excellent so far this season for Lamar. His ability on the ground gives the Cardinals a chance in this ball game, and you have to be able to run the ball if you want to beat Sam Houston State. I like how the Bearcats had to run the ball last week to knock off Stephen F. Austin in the Battle of the Piney Woods. I think they can rely on that ground game once again this week against Lamar and get the win.
This weekend's SWAC action will see Arkansas Pine Bluff host the Delta Devils of Mississippi Valley State. Savannah State will head to Alcorn State. The 4-2 Alabama A&M Bulldogs will head to Grambling State. Jackson State will host Alabama State. Texas Southern will welcome in Missouri S&T. And Prairie View A&M heads to Southern.
The Alabama A&M Bulldogs are on a 2-game winning streak and have a huge test this weekend against the Grambling State Tigers. In the East Division, the Bulldogs are only a game back of division-leading Alcorn State and still have to play the Braves later on this year. Junior quarterback Akil Glass is one of the best passers in the FCS and gives them a chance to go far this season. He's thrown 18 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions, completing 66% of his passes in the process. If the Bulldogs can get better play from their defense, it'll help increase their chances of getting to the Celebration Bowl come December. Another team with their sights set on the Celebration Bowl this December are the Prairie View A&M Panthers, who head into Baton Rouge this weekend to play the Southern University Jaguars. The Panthers were able to stop the bleeding last week as they got a much-needed win after a 3-game skid. Their main issue has been penalties and a defense that has struggled mightily this season. The Jaguars have one of the better defenses in the SWAC and are looking to get their second win in conference play. Now, they play more of a deliberate ball control game, and I think that'll be enough to get them the win at home.
I think that the main reason to choose HBCU is for the family atmosphere. The guys are going to get the core values that their parents taught them, that their family members tried to raise them. You'll have a close-knit atmosphere. You'll actually have guys that care about you as a person. So I think that's the main reason for choosing the HBCU.
It's time now for our Stats FCS Game of the Week preview, and boy, it's a doozy as we have the 5th-ranked Villanova Wildcats heading to Bridgeforth Stadium to take on the 2nd-ranked James Madison Dukes. Now, it's been well documented how great the Wildcats have been defensively this season. Villanova is only giving up, on average, 3 yards to carry on the ground and 6.2 yards an attempt in the passing game. Now, offensively, their ability to play with balance has led them to averaging 39 points a game while also excelling in the red zone. Their red zone defense has been spectacular as well. James Madison approach has been about the same as it's always been, dominating defense that can also turn the ball over and the element of the big play on both ends of offense. The Dukes are tearing it up on the ground to the tune of 268 yards a game rushing. Now, they do a great job of beating opponents along the line of scrimmage. Their offensive line is fantastic and has been a cornerstone for them so far this season. These are two very similar squads, but I do like Villanova in this ball game. I'm putting trust in quarterback Daniel Smith of the Wildcats to make a few more plays than Ben DiNucci when it counts. Get the Villanova Wildcats the win on the road. So that's it for this weekend's episode of the FCS Kickoff. Be sure to follow me on all of my social media accounts. And don't forget to check out and subscribe to the Football Game Plan Network located at youtube.com/footballgameplan. And while you are in the subscribing mood, head over to iTunes, hit subscribe to Football Game Plan Podcast, and leave us a 5-star rating, where you can check out our FCS Opening Drive podcast, where David Hassagen and myself will bring you all of the news, notes, and tidbits surrounding the football championship subdivision.